Welcome to the Stoned Heen View, a podcast series which interviews a range of sport club representatives and leading professional sport club personnel during the COVID-19 shutdown. We find out what these people are doing during the current health crisis with some of our most popular sports seasons postponed. I'm Mark Heenan, and today I'm joined by the Stoned Heen View Summer Series co-host, and we actually just caught up with him last week to learn about his life story during COVID, and his name's Ben Carbonaro. And Ben, it's great to have you on the Stoned Heen View podcast summer series, and we've got a great guest today. And incidentally, it's our first interstate guest, and we've had some big names. We've had some netballers and professional netballers on, but we've got a big guest today to talk about the world of netball around COVID and such a sparkling and dazzling media personality.
Absolutely we do, Mark. It's a pleasure to be joining us today is former Australian Diamonds captain and current Nine netball commentator in Liz Ellis. G'day, Liz. How are you?
Hello, Ben. Hello, Mark. I'm terrific. Thanks. Lovely to be with you.
Excellent. It's great that you've been able to pull out some of your usually busy time to join us as well. I believe you were being busy playing mum today with your daughter.
Yeah, look, I've got a 9-year-old girl and a 4-year-old boy, and when it's not netball season, I do commit to spending as much time as I can with them. So today's been a busy day. I've played tea parties with teddy bears with my boy. We moved. I'm also married to a farmer, so we spent part of the day moving some cows around some paddocks, and then this afternoon I had to take my little girl to swim squad. So thank you for being so flexible. It's just one of those things, isn't it? When you got kids, they come first. They're always a priority.
Absolutely. And Liz, we want to talk about the netball and review, obviously, the 2020 Suncorp Super Netball season. And, we've had some connections to the show. Obviously, Ben's a new podcast co-host, but we have had Tegan Phillip on the program this year. And obviously, we had a few connections to Alice Teague-Neal through Mark Neal. He's a basketball CEO. What was it like as an experience of going into the hub and learning about, how the COVID world works around that and, going into that sort of biosecure bubble?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. And actually, I might as well have lived on Mars because the border closed to Queensland. So when they first said that Sydney was a hotspot and everyone had to go into the bubble, they said that sort of the area where I live in northern New South Wales, we were going to be okay to cross the border. So I just assumed that I'd be driving back and forth and seeing my family. So I went up there and I stayed the first week just to get settled and get into it. And then I thought right after that, the second round, I would start driving back and forth. And the Queensland government announced that week that they were closing the Queensland borders to New South Wales. It was a hard border. So earlier in the year when they closed it, if you lived within a certain range or 100 kilometres of the border, you could go back and forth. But they said this time, no, hard border, no one can come back and forth. So I rang my husband and I said, you need to bring the kids up. And so he packed the kids up and left the farm, and they came and stayed with us for a week. And we did think about staying up there the whole time. You might recall Bryony Akel packed up her 4 kids and her husband and famously took them all to the Queensland bubble for 3 months. And my husband and her husband are great mates, and we thought about doing it, but I'm married to a farmer. You can't just put a farm on hold. So he had to go back. We thought it was best that the kids go back because we were commentating 8 games a week. It's a massive job because it's not just the days that you're there at the courts. It's all the prep days that go into it. And at the time, I was right in the middle of the State of the Game review for Netball Australia. So we ended up doing over 100 hours worth of Zoom interviews and meetings with people. So I just knew that I couldn't give my kids all the attention that they deserved if I was going to pull Evelyn out of school and Austin out of his routine here. So they went home, and so I went 6 weeks without seeing them, and that was really hard. But it was probably harder on Matthew. He became a single father with 2 kids, and he's trying to run a farm. He's got cattle giving birth. He's trying to get Evelyn to netball. He was in charge of delivering the Zupa Dupas after netball training on a Monday night. But, he also had a 4-year-old boy who isn't at school. So, managing him and getting him to, swimming and all that sort of stuff. So, it was okay for me. I was really busy with work and the State of the Game review, and I was Kath Cox and I shared an apartment. So it was like being on tour without a coach to tell us to stop drinking and partying and having fun. So the first couple of weeks it was like we were 18 again, and then we're like, no, this is not going to work. So then we knuckled down and did our job. So for me, it wasn't too bad. It was actually, I didn't have to think about cooking dinner because I'm the cook at our house. I didn't have to think about running the kids around. So it actually, my life became really simple. I just worked 7 days a week, and I love my job, so it's not like it's hard work. And really, but I had to sort of, try to help keep up Matthew's morale because he was the one that did it tough back here.
And just on the state of the game review, Liz, is there anything you can make public to us? The reason why I asked that, because at the moment, Chris Symington has stood down as the CEO of the competition, and Marnie Fechner's gone across to Cycling Australia to become their CEO. So we're in a bit of an interesting conundrum with netball at the moment, aren't we?
We are. There's 4 major positions across the netball ecosystem, I guess, at state level and national level. There's 4 CEO positions or deputy CEO positions that are waiting to be filled. The State of the Game review the report's been handed to the Netball Australia board. It's been circulated to all the MOs, to the independent clubs, to the Netball Players Association and to Confident Girls. And most of the report, I think, will be made public later this week. We're still going through to figure out what stuff is, or I'm not doing it anymore because it's not my report anymore. I've handed it to Netball Australia, but they're determining what's commercial in confidence and what can be released publicly. So there'll be some interesting stuff around that in the next couple of weeks, but it's been received really well. I think it's a bit of a line in the sand for our sport to acknowledge what's happening around us, both in terms of the participation space and super netball and commercial as well. So I hope that it's a bit of a roadmap forward for the sport to sort of get to where we want to get to. And I'm desperate for our sport to get to Australia's number 1 participant sport. I don't want it to be Australia's number 1 participant sport for women or team participant sport for women. I want it to be our number 1 team sport. I want super netball to be super profitable and to be delivering funds back down the tree into grassroots. So the report, I think, is a roadmap for that, and a lot of time and effort has gone into it. And from my point of view, I love my sport, and I feel like I'm a custodian of the sport because I feel like it's created me. It has made me who I am. So there's no way that I could ever repay that debt. But this is part of that. This is head down, bum up, trying to get this right for the future of the sport. And my little girl plays, so. At one end, I'm thinking about super netball and looking at that. And then I coached 2 Net Set Go teams at Ballina on a Saturday. And I didn't see any of their games this year because I was in the bubble, which was really difficult. But I think about the sport from their point of view. They love it. They just want to be able to play. Their parents want them to be able to play in the easiest and most cost-effective manner. So that's what we're trying.
How important is these appointments to get right, particularly around COVID, and knowing that netball can still be a stronghold? And will you have any involvement with this?
I won't have any involvement. So essentially the way it works is that I did the review and I'll hand it over. And I may be involved in some parts of the implementation of the review going forward, so around the strategic planning in particular, but that hasn't been decided yet. And I'm happy to be advised by the sport, by the people who are running the sport, what they want me to do and where they need me to step back. So at the moment, I'm a bit of a passenger. I think you're right. Getting the executive structure right is crucial for netball at the moment. I will say netball weathered the storm reasonably well. Netball has always been a sport that is really well run at the grass.
The summer, I mean, we look at the football codes, NRL and AFL, and obviously cricket. Yeah, there's some of the biggest sports in Australia. How important is these appointments to get right, particularly around COVID, and knowing that netball can still be a stronghold? And will you have any involvement with this?
I won't have any involvement. So essentially the way it works is that I did the review and I'll hand it over. And I may be involved in some parts of the implementation of the review going forward, so around the strategic planning in particular, but that hasn't been decided yet. And I'm happy to be advised by the sport, by the people who are running the sport, what they want me to do and where they need me to step back. So at the moment, I'm a bit of a passenger. I think you're right. Getting the executive structure right is crucial for netball at the moment. I will say netball weathered the storm reasonably well. Netball netball has always been a sport that is really well run at the grassroots. And I think what COVID has done is seen those grassroots adapt and be really agile and look to make sure that they're still getting a competition going. If we have this sort of problem again next year, then I think it'll put unbelievable stress on the system, and we'll have to have a close look. But, I'm confident there's some really good sports administrators out there at the moment who aren't leading a sport. And I think there's probably a bit of interest in netball. It's a great sport. It's poised to really take that next step. So I'm confident going forward that we'll have the right people in place at the right time.
And the super shot, Liz, was a massive bone of contention again this year. Do you think there's going to be a bit of contention again with it next year? Because Twitter's still going mad about it. Everyone on there's got something to say about it, if it's good or if it's not good.
Yeah, look, and from a commentary point of view, I really like it. It keeps games alive, and I see the criticism and I understand it, and especially if you're a netball purist, it's not great. But, I tend to take a long-term view. And if you look back 60 years, the sport was 9-a-side in some spots. I have seen a 9-a-side game. I was in Tonga 13 years ago, and there was a couple of 9-a-side games being played. So, the sport has always evolved, and I think we've got to be really careful that we don't say what it is now is what it has to be forever. The super shot has some really good benefits. It allows, it creates saleable assets, right, that the sport can sell. So it actually creates revenue for Super Netball, which is really important if you want your players to be paid. I do understand that, there's an issue around that it may have an impact on the diamonds, and because there's no super shot at international level, there's no timeouts. I feel like that's got to be managed a whole lot better around how, the diamonds are resourced to be able to have enough time together prior to going, particularly benchmark events like World Cups and Commonwealth Games. But, I like the super shot. I can see what it's doing. I can see from a commentary point of view, our job is to tell a story, and selfishly, it makes my job easier to do, to sell a story, to keep people engaged in the game. I think we've got to be really careful to understand that netball Twitter is not all of netball. There might be a couple of hundred people on netball Twitter, very passionate people whose views should absolutely be taken into account. But there's also 300,000 people who watch the sport every weekend who are not on Twitter. So their views have to be taken into account too. And, the sport did, through the State of the Game review, there was a massive survey done with 10,000 people responding to that. So, there was, you've got to understand that there's a lot of people who the sport is trying to manage as stakeholders. And, and most importantly, you want to run a successful competition that can generate funds to pay players.
Liz, when we had Teagan Phillip on the program, we talked about things like what the state bodies were doing and, having a home gym set up before they went into the southeast Queensland bubble to play the season and being away from family and all that. And there was that sort of, players would be on Zoom and they'd be talking to each other in the lead up, and then they'd finally make that trip up to the hub and to get the season underway at the start of August. But, if we look at some of the netballers, and particularly through that interview that I saw, is that, there are a lot of netballers, or particularly at the Suncorp Super Netball League, that what I found that I didn't know, that there is a player's voice there. And, having covered a number of different sports and having a passion for different sports, I must admit, I take my hat off to your sport, because some of the players are so articulate. They're so friendly. Ben and I have been out in Melbourne before, and they're just so real people, real down-to-earth people. I don't feel like you can't touch them or they're just untouchable or anything like that. And as a sport, do you think netball learnt a lot during COVID, and what the players did, and how they were role models for young children, particularly even in the hubs, but representing their states?
I think netball really showed what its true colours are during that period, especially in the bubble. When you look at how different sports went, AFL, rugby league, netball was exemplary. The players were outstanding. There was no one in trouble. There was no one doing the wrong thing. Everyone abided by the rules. It was very netball. This is not unusual for our sport to have women who are terrific role models, who do the right thing, who get the job done. There's no whinging. There's no carry on. There's no controversy. they just went and did it and provided terrific spectacle. And that grand final was one of the best games, one of the best grand finals that I've called. So, you know, I don't know that you can speak highly enough about our players. And I think what COVID did was show the rest of the world what brilliant women are involved in netball. So I wasn't surprised, I've got to say, because, you know these athletes and you know what they're like and you know their level of commitment and their professionalism. But I think that COVID bubble, everything in COVID got magnified. So good things got magnified, bad things got magnified across a number of different sports. And I think what you saw with netball was the role models, just how impressive they are, these women are who play our sport. That got magnified, and I was really happy to see that happen. I was happy to see the focus be on them as, you know what, when things are tough, this is how you behave. You get on with it.
And obviously the West Coast Fever lost the grand final, but they've really improved in the last couple of years under Stacey Marinkovic. And now time will tell to see how she goes with the Diamonds. But do you feel that the impact she has with the Fever definitely helped to get over the line when they appointed her as Diamonds?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. You know, I don't know that was part of it, you know, simply because going into that, she's had some success with the Fever and she's had some not so great years as well. So, you know, she's probably been able to reflect on the fact that what happens when you're successful and what happens when you're not successful. But I think she really flew through that interview process and stood out as somebody who met the credentials that they really wanted in the Diamonds coach. And, you know, I, like a lot of people, I was surprised, but I guess you can only sit back now and see what she does. She had a really successful year. She's an amazing person in the way she manages the time. You know, she's got a little fella, little boy. He's beautiful. And yet here she's just like really doing 2 full-time jobs. I don't know how she does it. You know, so she's just an amazing, and everyone talks about the fact that she's an amazing time manager and she's really thorough and, you know, she's so well prepared. And I suspect that's what probably stood out through that interview process. So, you know, like any Australian coach, the proof of how you go is in what you bring back from a World Cup and from a Commonwealth Games. So I'm looking forward to seeing how she goes. I think there's some really talented players who probably haven't tasted the success that they deserve over the
that there'll be a lot of changes in terms of players moving from state to state, and also too, particularly if we take into account, say, the Melbourne Vixens goal lineup, because there's no Tegan Phillip, there's no Caitlin Thwaites, but you know they've still got the strong leaders there like the Kate Maloney's and obviously Liz Watsons and those sorts of players. Who do you expect to be up there for 2021? And do you expect to be many transfers or players seeking a release to a different state?
No, we've just come through, I guess, the contracting period, and there wasn't a lot of movement. You know, there's only a year to run on all the participation agreements that the clubs have with netball or with Super Netball, and that runs until the end of next year to the end of the broadcast agreement. So all the contracts, anything to do with Super Netball, whether it's player contracts, whether it's team contracts, participation agreements, they all end at the end of next year. So most teams in 2019 signed people for 2 years so that they had their teams really well set. So there hasn't been a huge amount of movement. There's been a little bit of movement. And I was aware of some players who considered moving clubs but eventually stayed with their own. I think Melbourne are going to be hit hard by the loss of Caitlin Thwaites and Tegan Phillip. They've recruited Kaylee Stanton and they've still got MJ, you know. So, you know, Maui Kawenda's an amazing athlete and she's inspirational and, you know, on court and off court. So you can't discount them because you know she's going to deliver you 40 goals a game. So if Kaylee can stand up and deliver 10 to 15 goals a game and put that with that mid-court and the defence line that Melbourne have, they're still going to be right up there. You know, I think West Coast Fever might come back a little bit smarter and stronger next year. They've got a bit to prove. They'd feel really ripped off after losing 2 grand finals in 3 years. So, you know, I'd like to think that they're probably going to be there or thereabouts. The Swifts are probably a little bit disappointing this year, never really hit their straps. And I think it's always really hard to back up after a grand final win. So I think they would have learned from that. They're still a really talented team. Probably Helen Housby was a bit quiet this year. I'd like to see her step up and take some control of the games. But I think the big team next year is going to be Firebirds. You know, they're unbelievable. They've got a great lineup. Brilliant mid-court, love what their defence end is becoming. And, you know, Romelda Aiken was, you know, played like she was 20 again this year, didn't she? So you put her with Tipper Dwan, who looks to be a superstar in the making, and I think they're probably a team that's going to do very, very well. And I'm probably going to be accused of bias, you know, in my top four, because two of them are coached by two of my best friends. You know, Brian Yeagle coaches the Swifts, Megan Anderson, you know, is now coaching the Firebirds. I think she'll be really good. Megan doesn't waste words, doesn't say a huge amount, and when she talks, you listen to her.
Hey, Liz, I've got to say, we'd like to get into a little bit of banter, and this is what the show's about as we start to wrap up a little bit. But a Sunday morning ritual for me, well, online mass, listening in the AirPods, but making sure that I sit down and I channel flick, I watch the Sports Sunday and Offsiders on the ABC, and yeah, the panel of Peter Fitzsimons, yourself, and Mark Taylor and James Bracey, got a lot of laughter out of it. Obviously, for part of this year, you were at your place in the Northern Rivers, and then you were up in the netball hub, and then you came down to Sydney. I mean, how much fun was it this year to be part of Sports Sunday? Because it wasn't the usual setup for the year.
I got to say, I love dialing in from home. So there I was, I worked 10 minutes a week. You know, I put a bit of makeup on, and I tried to get the kids out of shot. There was a couple of times they both ended up in shot, which was like, oh my goodness. So I actually missed going into work because, you know, like it was fun dialing in for the first few weeks. And after I was like, oh, but they're all in Sydney having fun without me. So I suffered terribly from FOMO. So then I went up to the hub, and it was so difficult to sit and do a show sitting in an empty netball stadium. And sometimes the delay was like 5 or 6 seconds. So I just felt really out of it. So I was really excited to get back. And it's a terrific show. Our producer is a woman, Ellie Chapman, and she is just lovely. And I love that we're a show that's produced by a woman. You know, I love working with Fitzy, and, you know, I take the same approach to him as I used to take to Irene van Dijk, which was retaliate first. So you got to get your jabs in early. Hope you can't run me down. You know, and often he'll say, coming out of a break before the cameras start, he'll look at me and he'll go, Ellis, I'm coming for you. And I'm like, bring it. See if I care. So we have heaps of fun. And Mark Taylor's just a terrific bloke as well. So, you know, and I was rapt to see this year that Coxie stood up, and she's able to get in and have a good run. So, you know, I think it's a really good show. It's been going now for 4 years, we worked out the other day. So it looks to be going again next year. So it's got an unusual longevity.
And there's even more female connection at Channel 9. You've got a former New South Wales netballer who I think you probably played with too, in Keely Devery. She's one of the executive producers with, is it Murray Connellan, who also is involved too?
Yeah, so Keely's the head of netball. So that's a position that she was born for, really, head of netball. And she was my hero. She was my idol when I was growing up. So you know, it's fun to sort of to have her now as my boss. We're teammates in the Diamonds, teammates in the New South Wales team, and now we're teammates at Channel 9. So she's great. You know, she's so passionate about sport. So often it is an all-female cast and crew. You know, it was great this year to have Gordy and myself and Coxie and Bianca and Laura Geitz doing the on-camera stuff. But, you know, you had Keely. We've got a woman called Sam Sparks who does some directing. So, you know, sometimes everybody involved, there's a real female streak, which is great. And Murray really gets put in his place by all of us, basically.
Now, Ben, Liz, I was having a look on the Wikipedia profile as well. I'm not saying it's always a trusted source, but Liz wrote a book in 2018, and she can talk about that, but I won't go into too much detail. But Liz, just talk about, I mean, could you write a book about what your year was like this year in COVID? And you did write a book in 2018, actually, about, I suppose the motherhood and conceiving and all that sort of stuff. And I'm fascinated to get a bit of, I suppose, a sneak peek about that. But, is that something that you would like to do more of, writing and detailing your thoughts?
Nah. Writing that book, If at First You Don't Conceive, is the name of it. It's a friendly guide to conception and fertility. And I wrote it after going through 5 years of infertility, secondary infertility. We conceived our first child, Evelyn, really easily. And then Austin took his time coming along, which pretty much sums him up as a personality. So, we went through a lot of fertility treatment, and I got to the end and I had a huge pile of paper, and I thought, I should recycle this. I'm sitting in my office now and I'm looking at where this paper was, and I thought, you know what, there's so much knowledge. I've got so much knowledge now from going through this process for 5 years. I should write a book and share it. What I didn't give any consideration to was the fact that if you're going to write a book about something medical like fertility, you actually have to get it right, and you have to actually understand what you're talking about. So that was a late, no.
And you're on the project too, as well.
I am. Yeah, I get around, so I do the project a little bit. It's good fun, you know. It doesn't pigeonhole me then as just sport. You know, I have lots of interests. I have a degree in history. I have, you know, I'm legally trained. I love farming and gardening and science and politics and philosophy, and I read voraciously. So I like doing shows that I love sport. It's my bread and butter.
And you got your column too in the Sydney Morning Herald, Liz, which I think in some ways is a bit of an agenda set.
Yeah, do you know, sometimes I go to press send and I feel like my husband, I'll walk out and he'll go, "So, did you throw a grenade today?" I'm like, sometimes I feel like I'm like, duck for cover. You know, I don't deliberately set out to set the agenda, but I do try to be opinionated, because I think if you just write stuff that's really nice, it's not going to get read. And netball has got as far as it can, I think, by being really nice. Now it needs to be truthful. And I called Andy Crook used to run the ANZ Chance before it became Super Netball, and you know, I rang him up one day and I said, "Oh, mate, I just want to let you know that none of this is personal." He goes, "No." I read it and I laughed, because I said, he goes, "Every time you write netball bosses, I know you're talking to me." And I'm like, yeah. And like Marnie Fechner, her and I have a really good relationship, and she just rang me when she took over as the CEO, and she said, "I love it. Just keep doing it. You know, we have to be mature enough to not take things personally, to understand that, you know, when I'm trying to say things, it's to drum up interest and to get people talking. And sometimes that's uncomfortable. Sometimes it's really uncomfortable. I have to write things that I don't like to write, but all you have when you're in my position is your integrity, and you have to tell the truth. So that's what I try to do.
And Ben, you've got to compliment Liz on her, you know, the glasses and the dress, and how good is she's looking $1 million.
Oh, she looks great. It looks like she's going to air on Nine Netball. We actually set off air, listeners. If Liz was maybe trying to outdo me, because I'm the one that usually wears the flashy shirts, not Liz.
I know. I'll let you into a secret. I don't know if you can see. Like, I've gone blonde, right? But that's because I'm grey. So this is my natural colour up. Oh, I don't know if you can see it. There you go. That's my natural colour. So I'm silver. So I've actually, through the pandemic this year, I stopped dyeing my hair, obviously. And then one day I just went, you know what, I'm not dyeing it anymore. I have to go to the hairdresser every 3 weeks. I'm not doing it. So I've given up being a brunette. I've gone blonde while I grow it out. And then, very soon I'll just be a silver-haired old lady. So I'm trying to convince my husband I'll be a silver fox, but he's not buying it.
Well, you know what? After covering the long stint of netball and all the hours you do, and not just with the television side of the commitments, but you know, with what you're doing with the game review and all that, so you're looking splendid. And Ben and I are just honoured to have you as part of the podcast. So we really want to thank you for coming on the Stoned Heen View. We've really enjoyed your thoughts talking about all things netball and how it's gone around with you with COVID. So thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Ben Carbonaro, what a great guest. Liz Ellis, who's part of netball royalty. She's a big name when it comes to the world of netball in Australia. And thank you for having the good contacts there to get us in touch and going from there to get her on the program.
Yeah, no worries at all, Mark. One thing I do love about Liz is she always freely gives her time to those people who are genuinely passionate. And I don't really have covered netball to make money out of it. I do it because I genuinely love the game. And Liz always reciprocates whenever I get in touch with her, and she says, "Yeah, no worries, I'll come on, I'll do this, I'll do that." You don't have to go through any red tape with managers or anything like that. It's straight to the source.
Absolutely. So you can get in contact with any stage and in mind with a contact from sport. You can check out the Stoned Heen View on Facebook and Instagram. We're also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our launching platform on Podbean. And you can also check out the Stoned Heen View. This episode with Liz Ellis, which is episode 37, will be on the YouTube channel and also on Twitter as well. at the Stoned Heen View. So until next time, we'll see you soon on the Stoned Heen View. Thank you.